Because I know you always run on a tight schedule, and I don't want you to have to sit around if it was crunch time. So I'm truly blessed that you're able to be here with us, Darren. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great to be here.
Yeah, just so everyone knows, I think first, Darren, if you have a moment just to introduce yourself and kind of give a little mini introduction, and then we as a board can ask some specific questions and then open it up to the public for questions. And then we'll get into, more of the development aspects that we want to talk about after talking with Darren. And then any members of the public that have any questions additionally, that's when you can ask those too, just so everyone knows. That's kind of the meeting flow today.
Okay. And let me know when you want me to drop off. It's perfectly fine.
Let's say like 1:05 we'll get started, just in case anyone else shows up.
Sure.
And Ravonda, you're going to be in transit, right?
I am in transit now. I'm almost to my home.
Okay, great.
And then I'll be changing you'll be able to see me as well.
Oh yeah, perfect. So just so everyone knows, Ravonda is the formal chair of our like ad hoc Affordable Housing Development Committee meetings. But because 1 p.m. is just not the best time for any of us, seemingly, that's why we're changing our meetings as of next week to 5 p.m. And we also have our monthly meeting as well at 6 p.m. But yeah, today I'm just going to kind of be doing all the introductions. And then once Ravonda gets home, we'll have her beautiful video with some sort of background today, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being able to do this.
All right, so let's get started. So first of all, just again, thank you so much to Darren Scott for coming in. We really wanted to talk to you because you're, the Upstate East Director of Development at New York State Homes and Community Renewal. So yeah, if you could just give us a brief introduction just for the board, the members of the public.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to talk with you. Hopefully this is a two-way conversation, right? I'm very interested in learning more about the Hudson Housing Authority and Hudson. I have some experience working with the Housing Authority already, and some experience in Hudson, but I don't want to be at all presumptive to know, what is right or, everything about your community. So it's really important for me to hear from you, what your vision is, what your concerns are and that sort of thing. And then to work with you to try to come up with solutions, because I think that's what New York State Homes and Community Renewal, that's really what we're about, is to work with local communities and trying to figure out solutions to their housing needs. So I'm Darren Scott. I am the Upstate East Development Director for New York State Homes and Community Renewal. I've worked with the agency now for 4 years. Prior to that, I worked for the Albany Housing Authority for over 20 years. And I was at that time also for, I believe, 4 or 5 years on the board of the Troy Housing Authority and the president of the board for 2 of those years. And so I do know a little bit about housing authorities. I know a little bit about the challenges that they're facing, and really respect what residents and the community bring to the table as far as ideas about how to reposition that housing and make it viable for the next 30 to 50 years. New York State Homes and Community Renewal, we finance, we don't develop anything. Let me just put that out there first. We work with the developer community and with localities to help finance the development of affordable housing and the preservation of affordable housing. And I say preservation very purposefully because the existing housing stock, affordable housing stock in all of our communities, that's the starting place. We have to work to make sure that that remains viable while we're also developing new affordable housing, because the need is just insatiable. I have not gone into any community that hasn't needed more affordable housing, and housing that really is up to date, modern, provides the quality of life that I would want for my family. And so I think we start from a good place. We try to provide a framework of financing that allows a lot of flexibility for just about any situation, any housing type, any population that needs to be served, whether it be different levels of affordability, a supportive housing population. These are folks with special needs that require the housing to be affordable, but also for supportive services to be delivered on site so that those folks are able to live in an integrated environment amongst all their neighbors and to live independently as possible. Senior housing, veterans housing. We, I think, try to provide permanent affordable housing for just about every type of need out there. And to also, in that, regarding that flexibility in the financing, to try to take into account a variety of different types of housing: high-rise housing, low-rise housing, scattered site housing, historic rehabilitation, historic adaptive reuse. All of these things are types of projects that we finance. And when I talk about projects, I don't mean that pejoratively. It's I talk about it as far as a construction initiative, a development initiative. Just to jump back to a little bit about me. So my territory, you're sort of right in the middle of it all. I'm based, on a normal day, I'm based in Albany. During the pandemic, I'm based in my home in Troy, New York. And so I am a few minutes drive from Hudson. And, normally I would love to meet you in person, but, given the circumstances, I'm happy to meet with all of you virtually. My territory, just to wrap up this introduction, goes from everything north of Westchester and Rockland counties up to the Canadian border and out to, but not including Syracuse. So that includes a wide variety of communities, a wide variety of need. And, I think Hudson is unique in a lot of ways, but also the underlying issues that, sort of manifest themselves in different ways in Hudson, the underlying issues for the need of affordable housing. And so I'm very interested in trying to get an affordable housing initiative, a project started in Hudson, because frankly, there hasn't been anything developed in recent memory. And so it's really difficult to have a conversation when you're talking very theoretically about what affordable housing is without having something solid to point to, something that has been developed recently, that is responsive in its design to the surrounding community, that is integrated, meaning that there are different income levels within that particular development that reflect the community that surrounds it. That is, meets the needs of modern families, quite frankly, and that also preserves affordability. So all of these things are very, very important to the state of New York. I enjoy my work and I enjoy engaging with communities, residents, electeds, anybody who wants to have a conversation about affordable housing, what it really means, try to debunk some myths about affordable housing and its residents, that have been built up over the past, decades and so forth. With that, I'm going to stop with my introduction, and we can start the conversation with questions. We can, however you want to handle it.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, there's so much there, right? And you're coming to us on this board. This is our third Affordable Housing Development Ad Hoc Committee. And so you're coming to us really in our building process. We want a firm foundation so that we make a project that's going to actually come through and actually going to happen for our residents and for our city. And so it's very exciting to open up this conversation and for you to be our first person to come in and educate us as a board. So just thank you very much for that initially. We all really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of pieces here and just so many things to talk about. And I think, one of the things that we've been speaking about in this project is really something that we'd spoken about is this idea of, providing public resources. And so when we're talking about providing housing, one of the things that you said is to additionally provide things for people to engage with right there at their housing. And so one of the things that we've been discussing is, something like a YMCA.
Okay.
And I know that there are people here today that I think are, excited about that possibility. And I think it's a really interesting possibility for something, in tandem with an affordable housing project, a phased project. And so I guess just first off, is there anything that you could speak to with like the YMCA specifically and, the possibilities for that, I guess?
Sure. So let me start by saying sort of broadly, and then we can bring it right in, into that specific question. So in upstate New York, there's often a need that exists beyond the need for affordable housing. Usually when there's a need for affordable housing, they're in communities that are distressed, that are deserts. And when I talk about that, I mean they're lacking certain goods, services, and amenities that one would expect to be in a neighborhood that is thriving and really supportive of the residents who live in that neighborhood. And so affordable housing has to work in tandem with, or be a leader, let's say, in trying to attract market rate goods, services, and amenities into weaker market communities where the private sector wouldn't necessarily take the risk in investing in those communities. So YMCAs can fit into that sort of category. It's YMCAs have a great reputation. They serve a broad community. It's open to everybody. They provide great services. And it's an example of, something that I would want in my community. In fact, I'm a member of a YMCA. I could say the same thing about a lot of Boys and Girls affiliates or Boys and Girls Club affiliates. But the YMCA is one of those, it's like a gold standard, right? We try to, in my experience, my personal experience in doing development with a housing authority, and I would say it's backed up by, the policy that is promulgated by HCR. We try to use housing as a vehicle to help provide those non-residential goods, services, and amenities in communities, so that we're not just building housing, but we're also helping to answer other needs in the community that will help to lift overall quality of life. And so there is a possibility to, when you're sort of reimagining housing in your community, to also, when you're applying for housing dollars, to also apply for non-residential funding for the development of those non-residential spaces like a YMCA. There's a program called the Community Investment Fund, pardon me, that is specifically meant to do that. You can apply for up to $2 million per project. And what that does is that capital subsidy helps to write down the cost of building a new facility, and therefore, reduces the risk for an organization like the YMCA to consider developing in a market like Hudson. I think Hudson offers a lot. There's need, but there's also, I don't know how to put it, excess. There's, and I think a YMCA can answer, is a valuable amenity that would benefit all incomes. And so, but the Y, they're a business, right? And so they have to be conscientious about the market that they decide to serve. And by New York State providing up to $2 million, that's quite a lot of incentive to attract an organization like the YMCA to consider developing a new facility and staffing and operating a new facility in a market where they don't have a presence right now. The key, though, is New York State, we can provide some of the bricks and mortar money to help with that, but it's really up to the local, the locality, the community, to develop the relationship, to do the outreach to these organizations like a YMCA, and to have that conversation about if it's something that they would be interested in, if they see there's a need in that community, to begin that conversation. And then with the idea in the background that with an affordable housing initiative, there could be some assistance in helping to pay for the expenses of developing a facility for them.
Great, thank you. Yeah, because, this is one of the components of, while we're building this foundation for this project, this is a really important component of any sort of phased project that we're going to be entering into. And so I guess since this has become something that it seems like a lot of members of the community are excited about the potentials, I just want to open it up in this specific question. If any members of the public or the board have any questions specifically regarding the YMCA and the possibilities for this, and any questions just in general about the possibilities for Y and this public resource. So I just want to open that up for a moment.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Alderwoman Tiffany Garriga of the Second
Hello,
Ward.
how are you?
Fine, thank you. Nice to see you again, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, nice to talk with you.
Yeah, the YMCA has been an idea that has been floating around for many years. I remember a few years ago, a young lady, just so happens to be my daughter, when she was a young teenager, she had went around with a couple of her classmates and had a petition over 300 people signed for a swimming pool in the community. So if the works are coming together, that's what it sounds like, crossing fingers for YMCA. I would like you to consider building a community pool, whether it's indoor or outdoor. And that will also create jobs and hand in hand with the city, with lifeguards that we have at Oakdale, and ones that apply that wasn't hired, that can be hired. Also volunteers, within the community can volunteer at the YMCA. It's a lot of great possibilities, but please consider having a pool. That would be like one of the greatest things that the city wants and needs. And it'll be a beautiful thing for families and children uh, uh, to participate in on summer vacations and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tiffany. And just so everyone knows too, I'm going to be calling the director of the Capital Region YMCA sometime, in the next couple of days. And I can ask about the possibilities for a pool and what things of that sort will take as well. So just so you know, Tiffany, I'll let you know when I follow up on that.
Thank you. And Darren can help you with that as well, Mr. Scott.
I do. I do know David Brown. I haven't talked with him in a while, but it brings up, I should have given you some examples of this. When I was with the Albany Housing Authority and we were doing our first major redevelopment project, we wanted to, it was adjacent to School 20, which is an elementary school in North Albany. And at the time it was a K through 5 program. And the school district was going through an expansion and reorganization, and that community wanted a K-8 program, but they couldn't do it without the additional facilities. And so we teamed up with the school district and the YMCA, in fact, and we provided some financing to help with the development of a new YMCA branch that would be attached to School 20. And so through a cooperative agreement with the school district, the YMCA provided access to the gymnasium, the pool, the public library system was involved. So there was a small public library branch, and it allowed the school 20 to expand to a K-8 program, which served the needs of those families in that community, and was a huge, huge attraction for, to make that neighborhood that much better and a neighborhood of choice, one that people would want to live in rather than have to live in. Another example, we just recently financed a Boys and Girls Club in Schenectady. That was a sort of standalone project, and we were able to contribute I think $3 million. There was some extraordinary circumstances there that compelled us to put a little bit more in than we typically do. And the Schenectady is blessed by several foundations. And so the Boys and Girls Club did a lot of fundraising on their own. They used new market tax credits also, in addition to the financing that was provided by HCR. And now they have just a tremendous facility in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Schenectady that serves 2 disadvantaged neighborhoods. And then, let's see, I know of an example that's currently being worked on in Peekskill, which is Westchester County, but I did cover that area for a little while, where the Housing Authority and the city they own and manage a community facility, which is, I would say, a burden to, financial burden to both. And so they're looking for a way to bring the Boys and Girls Club in to manage that. And they would be looking to HCR to help with the financing to update that facility. So there are examples of this out there, but it's really a grassroots effort to figure out what it is your community needs, and then to initiate the outreach.
Yeah, I think specifically in our community, it's also about stitching something like a YMCA with, the youth department here, and to create,
Sure.
the collaborative relationship really guided by the city's youth department that's already done all of the grassroots outreach. And really just want to say, Stephanie, I see that your hand is up. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Hello, neighbors, and thanks for joining bringing this knowledge, Mr. Scott. I'm going to ask a question, which I'm sure you've already discussed in prior meetings, but I'm just catching up. So it sounds to me from previous discussions about building more housing in Hudson that, the appropriate land is hard to come by. And we have a large landowner in the community that is acquiring more and more land and is actively acquiring land, trying to acquire more land right now for a mixed use development. There's another large parcel of developable land that isn't owned by the city down here on Tanner's Lane, the old Kaz property. And then we have this beautiful John L. Edwards Elementary School building sitting in the middle of the community, like talking about stitching things together, that has adequate space, has an elevator, is accessible. So is it possible to, along with building, new housing and working with a developer to build the right kind of housing that the community wants and needs, to think about reusing that space for a real hub of the community that's accessible for youth, families, young adults, education, whatever. So
Yes. Yeah, the short answer is absolutely yes. Again, a common thread or a commonality with a lot of upstate communities is that there are underutilized facilities and buildings. Some are, owned by school districts or the local government. Others are owned by private individuals or have just been abandoned. And so these are eyesores, or they're burdens to the locality. And so they're looking for solutions of how to reuse those. And so I would say HCR has a rich history of financing the adaptive reuse of these kinds of facilities. If they can be turned into housing, then I bet we've done it. That includes schools, that includes warehouse space, that includes, just a wide variety of structures, some churches, I believe. I would say that, so these places weren't built as housing, and so not all the spaces within them are appropriate for housing, but they can be used for other purposes, like the gymnasium or auditorium, these larger spaces that really can't be carved up into residential units, or maybe you don't want to, because then you would be foregoing the historic tax credits that can help to rehabilitate or convert that facility. It's an opportunity to bring in one of these non-residential uses that I'm talking about. I'll give you an example of something I did. I took a small school in Arbor Hill in Albany that was all this revitalization and development had been going on around it, but nobody could quite figure out what to do with this 1920s school that was, some people wanted to tear it down, but a lot of people in the community it was very personal to them because they had gone to school there. And so instead of developing more like public housing, we felt like we needed to partner with an organization, and in this case, an arts organization that could help to, bring a different dynamic to the neighborhood, something that was both affordable housing, but also those kinds of services and opportunities that housing alone can't bring. So we partnered with a local arts organization, and they became the face of the project. And we developed it into 23 units of residential housing with an artist preference. And the space that was doubled as the auditorium, gymnasium, cafeteria was converted into multi-purpose space that supported artist studios, performance space, and gallery space. And so the sky's the limit as far as your creativity and what can be done with these buildings. The challenge is to assemble the parties who are going to work cooperatively to make that a success. You have to bring all the pieces together. In my experience, not one organization can do that. It's a partnership that's required.
Can I just ask one qualifying question? Is that just the logistics? Does getting funding from your organization require that this project be one site? Because I couldn't imagine making housing within the old school building here, because there are so many different needs in the community for shared space.
Mhm.
But does it need to be the kind of thing where one site has to contain a development, public space? That was my only question.
No, not at all. An example, you could, I can imagine in a scattered site housing in existing buildings in Hudson and new construction on vacant lots, and using the school as a facility for something that's not housing. That's a lot of space to fill up. But if there's the need out there and there's somebody, an organization that can, operate that and, keep the doors open, that's always a challenge. It's easy to build something relatively, but keeping the doors open is a whole different level of challenge. So, but if you can find that organization in your community or bring them into your community that has the capacity to do that, certainly you can do that. I can imagine a situation where there is some housing in that building, but maybe most of it is used for, artist or senior center or something like that that's not already existing in the community. And there could be some housing also off-site, scattered around in the neighborhood. Scattered site housing is really, it's not an approach that most developers like because it brings more uncertainty to the deal. You have more property, there's more neighbors, there's more regulations, it opens up the door. It's more complicated, but there are developers who are more mission driven and will take on a project like that. And that's, I think, is important in, when you're out there shopping for developers, that you look at their resume and the work that they've done before, and to see if they have the willingness, the capacity, and the ability to take on projects like that. But absolutely, I think what's key here is to determine what you want as a community, then find the appropriate developer for that, and then who will help you find the financing to accomplish that.
And I think, and Claire, I see that your hand is up as well. I just want to say, following the thread of JLE, because John L. Edwards is a city-owned property at this point, right? And we do have the Common Council president here, who's Tom DiPietro, and I want to ask him to speak to this for a second, because one of the reasons why we're even talking about this at the Housing Authority is really because of this need for a shared public space, and really the need for, everyone's here. We all know we need this space. We need a community zone. And so I guess I'm wondering, Tom, if you've kind of followed this thread and if you've explored, placing something like a YMCA in JLE and kind of, doing a hybrid with the youth department, and just can we follow this thread?
Yes, it's not a city-owned property, by the way.
Oh, who?
It is owned by the school district of Hudson.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which is part of the problem. They want a lot of money for it, upwards of $3 million. And that's become quite an impediment to the, I don't know how many of you followed, but we did develop a design project for combining a youth center, government offices, and still extra space, but it's just not getting the support in the community that we had hoped it would find. Partly because there's so much space left over that we would have to rent out, which would, create a whole nother layer of problems. But it's not off the table. I mean, it's still available for someone to do something with. To Stephanie's question, of course, she referred to two locations that are private. The city, we have a role of sorts, but the Galvin project is all their property. They're not buying more. They already own it all that they're developing, and the CAS also. So in terms of what HHA should be thinking about is, of course, the properties you now own and that you have. I know that's what your project is, and
yeah, 100%. Just, I figured, it's always been a question in my mind, and I know that also students at the youth department are always asking what's happening with John L.E. So, yes.
The estimates we got for developing it were high.
Yeah.
Upwards of $8 million, and because it was it didn't go forward. We're still not sure, you know, what kind of, 8 million didn't include the buying it for 3 million. So it's, you know, it's,
Yeah.
but it's good to know there's different sources of funding other than, we didn't really, you know, without housing involved, we weren't sure what other funding was out there for various possibilities in that building.
Claire, I see your hands up.
Hi. So a couple of things. To Tom's point about the John L. Edwards building, when I remember when they made the design for that, and a lot of folks were in agreement that that wasn't a conducive solution. I think when you look at how the history of the youth center and where it started to go downhill, like the youth became forgotten. They need their own space. To put them in a building with something like social services, I think is a disservice to the kids. I think building a new facility is something that is long overdue in the community. And if we have the capacity and the space, I think that we should seriously consider looking into that as an option. And I mean, knowing all of the things that the YMCA offers, it's literally the things that we need in the community: a daycare, a youth center, the city pool that the kids and families have been asking for years. Like, and to put it right in their backyard is beyond overdue. So I urge people going forward, when you are thinking about the YMCA, to put the youth first, because that's not been the case in the city for a really long time. And there's plenty of evidence as to what the youth are saying that they need and what we know the youth need. The youth center and the youth department hasn't had the capacity or the resources in a very long time to take care of our kids. And we're seeing the effects of that as we're watching shootings and as we're watching drug abuse rise, and we're watching things like that. So it's more than just space, as I'm sure everybody is aware, but it's detrimental, and it's not something that we really have a ton of time when we have something like this on our lap to go into this huge project, and we're considering housing, and we're considering reimagining the quality of life for Black and brown people that have been forgotten about for a long time. I think it's important to listen to what they've already said. We don't need to recreate and ask a million times. It's all right there in our laps. So that's my one comment. And then the other thing I would like to say is that I really hope that more people get involved and more tenant voices are able to be at these meetings, because this is really exciting. And I don't think that a lot of people are aware that this is something this big is in the talks for our city. So I'm excited to get our committee going and get more people involved. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Claire, so much. And so it seems like, we followed this thread to the end, and we find that, Hudson Housing Authority really does have a responsibility here to be building public resources. We don't have another zone for this. And so as we're building the foundation of our project, now we can move forward with that as a component. So that's really exciting to be able to do, because it will be amazing to be able to have a YMCA down there. And so,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So really, because this is the foundational phase of our project, it's kind of this idea of piecing all of the little things together, right? So first, now we can say, yes, we want to build YMCA and public resources down at HHA property, and that most likely the space that this is going to happen is on State Street. Due to the fact that, in the past projects with, the last RFQ that happened, the developer actually pulled out because we couldn't build a building that was higher than 4 stories, which is really how we started thinking about state as public resources. So now let's get into the real talk about affordable housing. Now that we're moving forward, we know we're building community resources here. So I guess there's so many different questions pertaining to this, right? But the biggest building that the Hudson Housing Authority has is Bliss Tower. And so we really want to discuss Bliss Tower here, but this is just the beginning of this discussion. And because we don't have resident voices here, we need, we're going to be developing more and more ways to get more and more residents involved in this conversation, because that's their voice is going to come first in this process. And so, yeah, I think one of the questions that would really be interesting, I think, to go over with you, Darren, is this difference between renovation versus rebuilding. And what are some of the, you know, pros and cons when we're talking about, you know, renovating the entire tower versus building, you know, additional housing that people would move into, and then, you know, taking down the tower? You know, what are kind of the differences here? I know this is a really broad question, but
Well, let me start by saying that different communities have approached this in different ways. And there are a number of different factors that have influenced their decision making. And I invite you to visit these other communities to you know, see what they've done and talk to the people who were involved. And maybe you'll understand, you know, give you a better understanding or more perspective, I should say, you know, that would inform your own decision making. So both approaches have happened. There are localities like Glens Falls and Amsterdam that have chosen to preserve their housing that is in towers, you know, or preserve their housing that's low rise. And in other communities, Albany, you know, many others, they have chosen to demolish their public housing and start over with something that they feel is more appropriate to today's needs and fits better into the community. I think that no matter what you do, respecting the fact that this is somebody's home is fundamental, and that you know, change can be scary, even if the prospect of change is, you know, is very positive. Still, change can be disruptive. It requires time and effort and challenge in order to accomplish it well. And so I should have done this at the beginning, but I really commend you for starting this process of a dialogue that's broad and inclusive in order to bring those perspectives to the table and give them respect, because we're talking about people's homes and people's communities. It's very, very personal. And so, yeah, so there's that has to be brought to the table and has to be discussed. At the same time, I would ask that everybody have an open mind about what the possibilities are, because we just don't know that yet until there's further study to determine the pros and the cons and what the spectrum of possibilities are. We really don't know what they are. So that's a process that you're embarking on now, and you'll take incremental steps in trying to get answers. And, you know, as opportunities, you know, certain opportunities that seem more attractive, more viable emerge, you take the next step to pursue that. But it can be a long process. It does take professionals. You know, it does take developers and architects and attorneys. It's a whole team effort. And that needs to be brought to the table too, because again, not every organization, not every person knows everything or has the capacity or the skill set to really arrive at an answer that is going to satisfy most people. And so you will need to eventually reach out and begin to build that coalition of team members that brings that advice and brings that skill set to the table to inform you as to what this, you know, what is the right choice, what's the right next step.
Darren, sorry, this is Rebecca Wolf. Can you just say
Sure.
a little more about what you, what those steps are? I mean, because I feel like that has been, to some extent, that's right where we are right now, is trying to determine, like, who do we need to talk to? What, like, do we want, you know, do we find a developer who can provide all of that expertise? Do we assemble the expertise ourselves? like pre-selecting developers? You know, how does that, what's the
Yeah.
best step?
Well, I think you're taking steps already as a community, right? There's a housing plan, and my understanding is that housing plan is going to be now advanced into an implementation plan. So there are these foundational, planning and policy activities that are already at work. You also have, the DRI. I think brought a lot of planning and consensus around how to move forward with the part of the city that we're talking about. I think finding a developer partner is important because eventually you're going to have to build something. You're either going to rehab the tower or you're going to do something else, or there might be a hybrid solution where new construction is occurring and you're rehabbing the tower. Just to name a few ideas. So somebody is going to have to help you through that process. And the developer is really the quarterback, to just give you sort of an example of how things work. So the developer is kind of the person who brings the team together and then coordinates how they're working together. And this includes the housing authority, its board, and its residents. So they're all at the table, they're part of the team making these decisions, but it's the developer who is going to be charged with bringing you through that process that will eventually result in something that is built, right? And so they will bear the expenses and the risk, frankly, of hiring the architects, hiring the engineers, hiring the attorneys. All this can be done with the consent of the housing authority. Absolutely, because you have to be at the table all the way through. You don't want to do a turnkey development where you have somebody come in and tell you what you're going to get, and then you don't see them until the project is built and you get the keys. Because then you're going to end up with an inferior product that doesn't meet, that's probably different than what you've initially envisioned. So the developer is a key part of that. And you can also bring in your own expertise if you feel like you don't want to rely solely on their opinion and their approach. You can hire your own attorney. You can hire your own planning consultant or housing consultant. You can hire your own relocation expert, and these, so they're working for you. The developer is working for you too, but they have a dual responsibility of also producing a product at the end of the day, and they're a business. I mean, let's be frank about it. So they're going to, you go through an RFP or solicitation process, and you do your due diligence on all the applicants, and you choose the one that you feel has done this kind of work before and will be the best partner for you in moving forward. But at the same time, you can also have your team of experts that will work with you, and you can bounce questions off of them and get their perspective, so that you are better informed and not relying solely on your developer partner to tell you what's best. That said, this is a cooperative exercise. I think, master developer agreements, which is the first document that comes after selecting a developer. The master developer agreement lays out the roles and responsibilities of each party, but a common theme that, and so just to finish that thought, it keeps everybody accountable for their role. But the common theme that runs through that document is that you're all working cooperatively. You all want to be successful. And if there's disagreement, there are remedies to that, because everybody, as soon as anybody puts an hour of their time in or spends the first dollar, they want to make sure it's successful, it's used successfully and doesn't go to waste. Nobody wants to start down the road on an effort that collects all this information and spends money and people's time and then nothing happened. That's worse than not doing anything at all. So that's kind of a broad answer. I'm not sure if it completely answered your question, Rebecca.
Or thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Good.
So just when we're talking about too, you know, the partnership with a developer, I know that, you know, when we're talking about a partnership with a developer, we're talking about a partnership agreement, right? And we're talking about, you know, from my understanding, it's something like 70-30 ownership, 60-40 ownership, you know? And is that just kind of the way that things typically are? That, you know, as the housing authority, we would be, you know, having our developer have, you know, 60% ownership over the property, and how that functions. I know that typically it's over the span of like 15 years. Am I right about that?
Sure. So this is good because let me just start by saying that public housing authorities have never been well served by HUD, period. Doesn't matter what administration is in charge, Democratic, Republican, HUD has never advocated for the amount of funding that's necessary to properly operate and modernize public housing across the country. Congress has never appropriated enough money to properly operate and modernize public housing. It's just politically untenable. Everybody is a supporter of affordable housing and public housing, but when it comes time to put the money down on the table, it's just not there. So in the mid 80s, there was a new system that was created called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. And that is an opportunity for private financing of affordable housing. Essentially what happens is the IRS provides on a formula basis each state a certain amount of tax credits that then they have to distribute in a competitive process. The tax credits are awarded to developers who meet state housing goals and work within the term sheets and regulations of the Affordable Housing Agency. In this case, it's New York State Homes and Community Renewal. Those tax credits, and I'll just sort of bring this home. So say Hudson Housing Authority and its developer partner get an award of tax credits. They would then sell them to a bank as a single buyer of those, or to a syndicator who pools together investors. The investor puts the resources into the project, millions and millions of dollars up front, with the promise that it will be operated by, in accordance to New York State housing law, and also under the IRS regulations for affordable housing, for a minimum of 15 years, but the period extends 50 years, in fact, the total affordability period. So the ownership structure is the investor, because they're making such a big commitment, they're going to own 99.9% of the development initially, okay? The 0.1% is owned as a general partnership, and the general partnership can be solely the housing authority, and it's typically a 51-49 split between the housing authority and the developer that you've hired. That may sound a little scary, because it's completely different than what HUD has, how HUD operates. HUD gives you enough money to put Band-Aids on things. You can fix the elevators, you can do partial modernization. What HCR wants is, we want a completely rehabilitated or completely new built project that will be self-sufficient for the next 30 years. We don't want you coming back to us for partial financing because you did the boiler and now you need to put a new roof on. We wanted a soup to nuts rehab or soup to nuts, demolition, new construction, whatever the project may be. So that said, the investor who owns the lion's share of the ownership entity, they have no interest in running that development. The housing authority is the majority owner of the general partnership and can also play the role of the managing agent, which runs the project on a day-to-day basis. And as long as the housing authority runs it in accordance to the regulatory agreement, which assures tenant protections like affordability, and that they're renting to nobody who's over income, then there's no problem. There's no reason for the investor to intervene. If things do go wrong, then there's a lot of money at stake, and then there's a curative process, but they do not want to come in and take over the project at all. They're not interested in owning and operating property. They're interested in sheltering their tax liability, okay? So, and this is the method by which 90% plus of the affordable housing has been developed across the country for the past 35 years, okay? It's tried and true, and it's really the only way that we're going to be able to get it done. And HUD, I've said some not so nice things about HUD, but what they have done is kind of open the door to allow public housing authorities to escape that paradigm that they are used to working in. I sometimes call it a divorce certificate, and if they offer it, take it and run. I believe the Hudson Housing Authority has chosen to do this. So when this happens, HUD will provide the operating subsidy that's necessary to keep the rents affordable, but provide enough operating income to keep the building open and operable. What they won't, and that's key. That's really a big part of why this works. But they are not going to provide the capital in order to do the improvements to that building, to keep it viable and open and not go obsolete. That's where New York State comes in. Why would New York State want to, when HUD looks like they're abdicating their responsibility for properly funding public housing, why would New York State want to step in and do that? It's because these units, these buildings, these residents live in our communities. If we were to allow this building to shut down, there'd be a crisis, right? And that's just something that we won't allow. So New York State, over the past 20 years at least, has embraced public housing authorities in repositioning their portfolios so that they are not dependent upon HUD any longer, and they operate independently under the tax credit regulations and the regulatory agreement with New York State that helps preserve affordability and so forth. So that's a lot of information, but I think the bottom line is that this is a way in which housing authorities have kept their doors open and continue to serve their communities with modern affordable housing.
Yeah, and I think like the real, I guess, crux of it is, this idea of this minimum of 15 years to 50 years of the ownership, and
right. The 15 years is after 10 years, the tax credit benefit to this investor has burnt off.
Yeah.
But they have to stay in for another 5 years. At that time, the housing authority should negotiate a first right of refusal to purchase the property from the ownership entity. Sorry, I'm just getting some feedback. So at year 15, and this is negotiated up front when you sign a master developer agreement with the developer, and then it's codified in a number of other documents when an investor is brought on board. the housing authority has the first right of refusal to purchase the property for, I think it's a nominal price. I think it's debt and if there's any residual value, and own it outright. No investor, no other, no other party, but it can be the housing authority solely. So, yeah, and in the meantime, I should mention too, in this whole process, there are a couple of roles. I mentioned the managing agent. That's essential. That's what housing authorities do already, and so they bring that skill set to the table. And they know who they're serving, and they know their community, and they're the best ones who, and they know how to manage housing. So they know they're the best entity to fill that role. You can also play a role in the development team, and that can earn the housing authority a part of the developer fee. The developer fee can run into the millions of dollars depending on the scale of the project. And so while the developer is going to be taking most, if not all, the risk in doing this work, you can negotiate a part, the housing authority can negotiate a part of that developer fee, which can be, it depends on what's being offered. If you want to take part of the risk and responsibility for doing certain activities, you can demand more of the developer fee. But I think starting off maybe 15% or 20% of the developer fee is reasonable. And then as if you do other projects and have more experience and capacity to bring to those projects, then you can command a higher developer fee. But that even 15%, that's a good chunk of money. That can be several $100,000. That is like free money. I mean, you've earned it, but it doesn't have strings attached to it. And you can use that for any number of purposes.
Okay, great. So I guess within this project that we're building, right, when we're partnering with our developer, I guess, let me just put like a hypothetical scenario, right? We go to our partnership agreement, we have our master developer agreement, it ends up being, 15 years. In 15 years, the housing authority will be, sold back the land for this nominal fee because the sheltering of the tax liability has ended. There's no incentive anymore. And so there's possibilities then there 15 years from now for, then the Hudson Housing Authority would, in theory here, re-own the land, the building, all of that. Am I getting this right understanding? Like this would be?
Correct. But it's still subject to a regulatory agreement with New York State that preserves affordability for 50 years.
Okay, that's the 50 years. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So real quick, Rebecca, I have to step out, but I just wanted to thank everybody for being here and at this meeting both before, and you have let me know all my dreams and wishes could definitely come true. And thank you for letting me hear for one more time. And I am looking forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ravonda.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. So it's been an hour now, and obviously we've gone through a lot of information, and of course there's so much more to go through and so many more questions, but just at first, let's do a check-in. Darren, how you doing? It's been an hour.
I'm fine. I can stick around a little while longer.
Okay, great. And just then, any other board members that would like to ask any questions at this time? I think this would be a good time for that. And then any members of the public that might have any questions. Tom DiPietro.
Oh, yes, Darren. Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
All these funding sources from HRC or HCR, I can never remember, are competitive, right?
Yes and no. There are two primary programs to apply for affordable housing financing. One is the 9% low-income housing tax credit program, and that is competitive. It's offered twice a year on a competitive basis, and so it's a deadline-oriented competitive process, and which is typically oversubscribed by 3 to 1. We get 3 applications to every one that we can fund. But the purpose is to really bring the best projects to the top in each region. So there are 10 regions, economic development regions around New York State. And so what we try to do, we try to do a geographic distribution of those resources that are made available in that round. And we will fund the top scoring eligible projects in each of those regions. I can tell you, so one other thing I wanted to add is that has, part of that is driven by state housing goals, and preservation of affordable housing is a state housing goal. Every application that comes to us has to meet a state housing goal. And so public housing is one of those goals. Preservation of affordable housing is a goal in general. And I think there are, within the scoring paradigm that we use to evaluate projects under that competitive process, housing authorities tend to do well because they're already well positioned as affordable housing and affordable housing providers to offer a good project that the state would want to fund. The second path is a 4% low-income housing tax credit. That tends to fund larger projects of over 100 units in strong rental markets because the program, as it may sound, 4% tax credits don't provide as much equity from an investor as a 9% tax credit. And so you need to make up that difference somehow. And so it requires much more debt on the 4% path. But the commonality between the two paths is that they are both driven by state housing goals, preservation of public housing, or the repositioning, I should say, of public housing, because we will do in a repositioning either rehabilitation or new construction, is a common goal across both programs. And the subsidies, the capital subsidies, so the tax credit equity isn't going to be enough to completely finance the redevelopment of a project. And so there are low interest loans of 0.5% interest only payment during the term. So it's very, very affordable. Those capital subsidies are requested at the same time as the 9 or the 4% tax credits. And so that really completes the development capital stack is what we call it, your development budget. The 4% are considered as of right, which implies it's not competitive. And it is true that you're not competing against other projects that are being presented within the same region. And it's an open window process. So the application timeline is more driven by the cadence of the project and not by the state saying we're going to have a funding round in the spring or we're going to have a funding round in the fall, like the 9% side. So 4% is as of right, meaning that if the project meets a state housing goal and works within the term sheets of those finance programs that it's requesting funding from, and there's available funding, then the project is likely to get funded, okay? And that's the basic difference between the two sides. But there are a lot of variables that determine, which path is appropriate for which project. And there are cases where we've done multi-phase projects where the 9% path is appropriate because there are extraordinary demolition costs or acquisition costs or something that's driving the cost of the development to be higher. And then there might be a 4% project that could be happening that kind of answers a different part of that of that whole initiative, so that in the end, you'll end up with exactly what you're hoping for. It might just be two different ways that you're combining in order to do it. Yes. Oh, you're on mute. There you
Hi.
go. Hi.
Hi, Darren. This is Marie Bell, the chairman of HHA. I actually have a quick question about blending. So currently, the board has actually been started several months ago exploring working with finding an investment partner to do initial work on Bliss Towers. And actually, we've been working with M&T Bank recently. And I believe if Tim could confirm this, I believe we're actually looking at a 4% FHA loan now. Is that correct? The possibility? Is it the 4%er?
It's the, I think we're looking at targeting the FHA 223 D or F loan through FHA.
Okay, so I guess the question is, if we were to pursue something like that, since we haven't actually applied for the loan yet, the board is still considering this. We would have the option, I think it's somewhere 3.5 million, possibly slightly north of that for the actual FHA loan, which we would have to apply for. But the bank has offered us a line of credit in the meantime, leading up to the application. And I just wanted to be sure that if we began a process like that, we can integrate that into a larger bundle, if we will. So it gives us, if we decided to go down that route, we still have flexibility to pursue the various other funding sources and integrate them into the current plan. So there's no problem with that. Is that pretty correct?
To be completely honest with you, that's a little bit beyond my expertise. That really
Okay.
gets into the underwriting of a project. But so my knowledge to date about the direction that the Housing Authority is pursuing, I think that is possible. I think the immediate need is to make sure that the building remains open and viable for the residents, right? I know that there's some safety and health concerns that need to be addressed right away. And the financing that I've been talking about, it takes time to put that into place, you know, to apply for it and then to actually do the work and all of that. So I think that what we have discussed before is a hybrid approach of taking care of those immediate needs right now, and that somehow we will work it out so that we can address the longer term needs of the building through one or both of those financing paths that I just talked about. I think so, but you want to be careful. I think you want to have that conversation about what that long-term vision is for the housing, because something that I don't think we could do is if you put in so many resources, then it might not be possible to completely take those out or work with them when, you know, the balance of the financing is applied for. So that's something that would have to be worked out on paper. I guess, and I just to another thought on that was, you know, if you do end up deciding that replacing the housing and then taking the tower down is the solution here, then, you know, I don't think anybody, it'll be a judgment call, you know, sort of a value judgment on, you know, was putting a couple $1 million into the tower now, you know, worth it when you're going to be taking it down in a couple of years. I think it's necessary to move forward with that in order to, you know, there are life safety issues, our systems, you know, elevators and more that need to be addressed now. I think you're right in doing that. But beyond that, you know, spending money beyond that, that's something that you're going to have to decide based upon what the long-term vision of this property is.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
very
Thank you.
interesting, the hybrid of working in the short-term vision and the long-term vision. And the short-term vision is to make sure that everyone living in Bliss Tower and Hudson Housing Authority property is living in good, viable, safe housing, right? So that is our current priority as of a short term. And then the long-term priorities is really what we're coming here to talk about at these meetings, which is the future of development on Hudson Housing Authority property. And so, yeah, so many pieces of the puzzle. And thank you so much for adding just so much to this conversation. And what I'm wondering is, I know that, you know, we're a little over an hour now, and I do have a list of questions that I would still like to ask, but
Well, should we do like a speed round?
we could,
Lightning
but
round?
I'm wondering if it's possible, you know, because now really the biggest component here is public outreach. You know, the biggest component for us at this stage right now is public outreach. And what I'm wondering is, once we've really built out our public outreach, which is going to be spearheaded by Claire Cousin, who is a board member who just spoke earlier, and Claire had some really exciting, amazing ideas for this. And so what I'm wondering is if it's possible, if you would like to come back and speak with us as a board once we've gotten way more outreach, and once we have really, you know, much more filled in of what this project is going to look like. It would be infinitely valuable to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm a resource. You can reach out to me. We can talk by phone, or I'm happy to join a Zoom webinar, however you want to do this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, because I do think that maybe this is a good time to let you, you know, I don't know, have a break, if you will, unless anyone else has any other questions. But yeah, then we'd just be going over, you know, the timeline that we built last week for, you know, our process for development, and then a coinciding timeline also talking about public outreach. So a development timeline that's kind of goes hand in hand with the public outreach timeline. And then probably just close up the meeting. Although I do want to say, you suggested to me to reach out to other housing authorities in the area.
Sure.
And I did get in contact with the executive director at the Kingston Housing Authority. And, you know, I just want to say that's a really great suggestion. And I'm actually excited, you know, on the board level, just to really start these collaborations and build a larger network of housing authorities, you know, just, you know, in order to like learn more about development, but also, you know, for accountability, which is a really exciting thing in the Upper Hudson River Valley or the Capital District region, however you want to call it. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for that lead, and it's really
talk to your peers. I think I mean, don't take it from me. I'm happy to tell you what I think and try to, you know, explain how the state works, but there are other housing authorities that have gone through this already, and others that are struggling to get started. And so different housing authorities are different points in their evolution, let's call it. And they're the ones who are grappling with all these questions on the ground, and, you know, their boards and their staff and their residents. It is a culture shift. And so it is good to reach out to others and get some real world experience. And I think housing authorities would be willing to share that with you. And I'm happy to make introductions to others if you like to.
Yeah, you did mention a couple of places that I'm definitely going to reach out to. Glens Falls, Amsterdam, and when you're talking about the renovations and then for the rebuilding, to talk in Albany, you know, would love to talk to the Troy Housing Authority.
Yep. Troy has embraced this, and they've done some very nice work. Glens Falls, I did mention that they're preserving a couple of they have a 4-project bundle that we financed. And you know, some of those properties are being rehabilitated. Another one is being completely demolished and rebuilt, all within that same financial structure. And so, yeah, there are lots of examples: big housing authorities, small housing authorities, ones that are, you know, you can travel to very easily to see for yourself how they decided to redesign a building or to demolish and build new.
Yeah, and I think that also really speaks to your point that you made earlier is that, you know, in the city of Hudson, we don't have new developments to go and look at and say, this is done, this is how it was done, you know? So we are going to have to go and travel and, you know, for these meetings too, provide imagery of what's possible, what's out there, what does it look like, you know, to really get, we need a firm foundation here so that this project can move forward. So it's really exciting. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Now I guess we should just roll through this timeline unless anyone else from the public has any questions. So just take a moment if anyone has any questions. Just raise your hand or just speak.
I think
All
there's
right.
somebody who's called in who has a hand up.
Oh yeah? Okay, great. Yeah, take the floor.
Six eight four four.
Oh yeah, okay. Should I?
They're muted.
Whoever called in with the 917 number, if you have anything that you'd like to add, please, now's the time for public comment.
Okay, well, if there are any other questions, you know where to find me.
Yeah. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Darren.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Good
very
luck.
much, Darren. Thank you.
All right.
Very
Bye-bye.
informative. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It's really exciting. It's really it seems like the more we talk about it, the more that this idea of, you know, a multi-year, multi-phase project really makes a lot of sense, and really filling that in is all going to be guided by the outreach that we're doing with the public, with the residents and the community. So
And I also think this issue of blended funding is really an important thing that we need to think about, because blended funding, I mean, partnership agreement, looking at the PRC partnership agreement, for example, it was one partnership agreement for the whole project. I think that there are, I mean, that I'm not saying that we wouldn't necessarily pursue a similar funding regime for this project, but I think he's also talking about how much control we have over deciding how this is funded. We'll also have something, you know, we'll say a lot about what our controlling stake is. Is there a possibility of doing one kind of funding on State Street, maybe something else behind Bliss, maybe a different kind of funding on Bliss, or are we got, you know, I guess that's just one of the other things, that the moving parts that we need to be very cognizant of, the
think
options.
that's the big thing with having multiple phases, is that you're also able to have multiple sources of funding, because the different sources of funding obviously have different regulations that are attached to them. So yeah, it's just so much information. Like scribbling. Yeah, okay, great. So, oh, Marie.
Sorry, just very quickly, don't forget that, you know, while a project is built out, let's say a partnership agreement project, let's say it was worth $55 million, like the PRC project, it's not as if the money just comes in one big pot either.
Yeah.
Every year you apply for the additional funding that you need to move forward with the project. Just a
Yeah, it's definitely. So now let's talk about just the timeline that we set up last time for anyone that's here and wasn't able to hear it. You know, the way that we've kind of figured this out, in order to really keep us going, keep us accountable, and please, as the public, keep us accountable for this. You know, we really want, and everything will be kind of flexible for a month to 2 months, just so you know as well. But we've set up this timeline for when we're going to have our RFP, RFQ, whatever it ends up being, till when we're going to be shovel ready. And so I'm just going to run through this timeline, and then I think probably what I would suggest is that we do another affordable housing development ad hoc meeting at 5 next week, right before our formal meeting, possibly to really go over the public outreach timeline. What does everyone think about that on the board? to have another ad hoc affordable housing meeting next week before our formal meeting.
You mean to try to hash out like the actual action steps of the outreach? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that coincide with our development timeline.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like two side-by-side timelines that function together.
sounds good. to me.
Because the biggest thing for us to be building an RFP, RFQ is that we need public outreach, and we need, you know, and we have resources to do so. There's, you know, yeah. Sorry, Marie, did you want to say something?
Well, just really quickly, we do have it on the agenda for the monthly meeting to do that. We could
Oh,
do
okay, great.
both. Yeah, I think there's a draft agenda in your email. You may not have seen it yet, but so we could do both. But we have not worked out what are the various components of that public outreach plan is going to be. So, I mean, we can build out some of that timeline, but you know, the details I think we need to explore those partially as a board. I think
Yeah.
we've also talked about creating a tenancy relations subcommittee. I think these are all things that we should explore as a board next week. So
Yeah,
we could do both.
And also because Claire isn't here, Claire's spearheading this.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
let's just, then, you know, I'm just going to run through the development timeline right now. We'll go through it, and then any space, this is all the space for public comment right after we'll go through the timeline. So basically what we said, you know, is that February and, you know, the beginnings of March are really going to be public outreach phases. The public outreach in order to build our request, right? So the public is going to guide how we build out this request. Instead of showing the public, showing the community, showing the residents an already formed project, we want to form it as we're getting information from residents. So basically this will be, you know, March 15th/April 15th will be the formed RFP, RFQ, or hybrid, whatever it ends up being, that will be in existence. And then there will be a rolling comment period. You know, we said 45 to 60 days or 30 to 45 days. I think I didn't write that down exactly, but we'll figure that out, especially based on what people need and what the need is for, you know, resident comment. But to really be able to have this document, have time for public comment over the course of a month or a little longer, and then be able to vote on this document at either the May meeting or the June meeting. So then we have our document, we've done our reconnaissance discussing all of these things. The residents know exactly what's going on and have had a voice in the creation of this project. We put this request out, we get the request back. I think Tim said it was like 30 days is the typical amount of time that you give for the request to be returned. And so that lands us around, you know, July, August, depending on if it's the May or June meeting, just to give us a little flexibility with this. And so now we're saying, you know, August, September, we have the developer, right? We've already built out the criteria for the developer that's public and that it's gone in tandem with our build out of the request. And so, you know, it'll be very clear why we choose who we choose, because we've already established that criteria as a community and as a housing authority and, you know, with our residents. So then that would mean that by October/November, we would actually have the project in our hands. We would have the architecture, we would have the whole project, it will be there. So now we're saying October to November 2021, we have the project.
Wait, hold on. So you're thinking, can you just go back? So we issue the RFP when?
We vote on the
June,
RFP at the
July.
May to June meeting, and we issue the RFP as soon as possible, as soon as it's voted in.
And the RFP will have sort of a deadline for when we want responses by.
30 days.
And when, I'm sorry, you said 30 days?
Yeah.
From when we issue it. So let's say we issue it August 1st or something like that? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
we would vote on it at the May or June meeting, and then we would issue it, you know,
Okay.
I would think as soon as possible, you know, we want to
But we
keep this
issue
moving. So it'd be 30 days from whenever we vote on it, basically. It might be, you know, a week later or something, but I don't see why we should take very much time.
Yeah, no, so once it's approved, it can be issued right away, and so that would be like,
Mhm.
let's say that's the end of May.
Yeah.
That it's
Or
that it's
June.
approved, or June. Well, so let's say it's the end, let's say it's mid-June. So then, and it would
Now we're at July.
issue it, we would have like a 30-day period to wait for
Yep.
people to respond.
Yeah.
So, and then, so let's say mid-July, so then, and then we have how long to select the developer?
Well,
As long
our
as we need.
criteria- Yeah, as long as we need, but the point of this, right, and the point of having weekly meetings too, is to make sure that our criteria for the developer is very clear from the get-go, so that when we're deciding who the developer is, it's very clear to the public why we're doing so. And so I would think that we wouldn't have to take very long on that, although, you know, it would be great to have all of the developers that have come forward to us to be able to explore this. You know, we'll explore this with the public. We'll have our criteria up. We'll have, you know, the developers, each of their criteria up. If anyone wants to come in and talk to us, you know, I guess it makes sense to have a month, but
Well, we might want to
If
interview
people
them or
want.
something. Like there might be conversations. I'm just thinking. So then that's like possibly mid-August, something.
Yep.
like
Exactly.
that. And
And
then,
then August, we've chosen the developer, and then we give them, you know, a month. I mean, Tim said a lot of developers, you know, they do this stuff, they do it fast, you know. We want a really good project. So, you know, in 30 days from August, let's say now we're in September, we have that project in hand, we have the architecture. And now we can make that public, show the public what it is, what it looks like, and begin those discussions, because simultaneously, you know,
I guess
I mean, I wonder if
I
it,
guess that's where I got confused, is like, so you, Kim and both, you think that it's possible that we could select them in mid-August, and that they would have like basically have a project like within a couple of months?
Can I just interrupt just real quick here? I think the idea would be, once you've built out the basic criteria, you submit your RFQ, RFP, you get your potential developers, you determine whether or not which one meets your criteria the best, the most appropriate developer. They will in all likelihood have some sort of potentially some sort of an architectural baseline. And my sense is, once you've selected a developer, then you go through the process of building out the architectural aspect of this, the specific details, but you've got your criteria in place. So where we came in, you and I, when we met, was at the drawing stage, right? So once you've selected your criteria, your developer, you go into that stage where you and I met, the charrette stage, right? Or the workshop stage, where you have a draft architectural rendering of what the developer is going to be able to potentially deliver within the criteria. And then you build it out from there. So I would imagine you're looking at 60 days at least, because you've got your workshop, the developer has to go back and make changes to those drawings. They have to be reintroduced into the public. The advantage is we have these weekly meetings, so we're not waiting a month every single time we're going through the steps. So that will make that process go through a lot quicker. So I think when Rebecca says we could have a project in hand by October, November, that's not unrealistic,
Cool.
I think, right? But we'd be building out at each stage, we're building out a different component of the project. So by the time you get to November, hopefully you'll have, or, you know, and again, you can build in some flexibility into that schedule, but you know, because don't forget, we're also working with the city while we're doing all of this too. So there's a whole, you know, there's several strands going on at the same time. And by the way, we're going to build this all out in software. And if somebody could help me with that, that would be really useful, because you know, I haven't done something like this in 25 years. And I think the technology's moved on. Certainly the software has, but we need to scope all this out so that you can visibly see what it looks like. But yeah, I think it's absolutely feasible.
Yeah, I think that just what you said too, it'd be great if we could get, I'm happy to just kind of throw together a document that's like, this is the timeline, this is where it's at, and be able to just have it on the website so people can kind of log the
Yeah.
progress, and we just add all of the things that we've done, fill it into the timeline so people know exactly, just like step by step. Because once we get to the architectural process, obviously we need the space for public scrutiny and the back and forth. So, that gives us another, month, 45 days, whatever it might be. And now then we're talking about going forward to the planning board and getting the project approved, which is yet another space for public scrutiny. The more public input, the better.
I just want to add, I think we will be engaging the planning board before we get even to that stage, right? So the planning board, I think we're going to have to start contacting the planning board now and working with them now. And I think the city as well, Tom is here, so that's very helpful, but we're going to have to be more proactive about approaching the city council soon.
Yeah.
Once we begin to build this out a little bit more, comprehensively.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to help with that. As you know, I'm the secretary on the planning board and would happily discuss all of this all the time. It's very exciting. And just one of the other components that I want to add when we're talking about public outreach too, is that we have an agency right here in the city, which is the Hudson Catskill Housing Coalition, which is, it should be put in our, request that they will be hired to do the public outreach. I would say that would be, because they're amazing. Their surveys and all of that stuff is amazing. So I don't really know how that ends up clicking together, but as far as our public outreach mode, I'm hoping that we'll be able to collaborate with them and also, have a relationship with them as a business, to pay them for their labor. So that would be really exciting too. But that will be something that we'll talk about more in the future as well. So for everyone, the idea is in front of the planning board, we're talking, 2 to 4 months, depending, everything is really flexible based on the project, based on what happens, based on the steps, right? So all of this does have to be flexible, but the idea that we set was that March 2022, we will have a project, we will have the architecture, we will have the approval, and we will be able to build this development. So that was what we figured out at the last meeting, which is very exciting.
I just want to add that these documents are living live documents. So if we need to, change it because we're a little bit behind on some aspects of our public outreach, there's scope for that. So just everybody should be aware that these are living live documents that we're going to have online.
Yeah, and simultaneously, like the importance of having this timeline is also to keep us moving, keep us accountable, keep us going, because we want to build a project. We want to build a community project. We want to build a city project. So it's very exciting. As you can tell, I'm very excited. So I think with that, we could, it's been an hour and 40 minutes. I would say, let's conclude the meeting. And thank you so much. Thank you to Darren Scott for coming in. And thank you everyone for engaging with this, and really excited to engage more and for more input. And then I guess if anyone has anything to say, the public, please. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.